I met my wife and we were together for almost 10 years, including 7 years of marriage. We have 2 grown children who have their own lives now. Our first date was a bit awkward. My wife is an attractive woman with a lively personality, while I'm more reserved and not exactly a heartthrob. I'm not bad looking, but I don't consider myself a real charmer. I tend to be quiet, and my wife has always been the one who stands out at parties or events. She has a kind heart, always seeing the good in people and being empathetic. Surprisingly, she liked me, and our relationship grew. Eventually, we got married and started building our life together. Things were going really well. We had a nice home, stable finances, supportive families, great friends, and our kids were thriving. But like in many stories, there's often a turning point that changes everything. For us, that turning point was a pregnancy. We already had 2 young kids and decided to go for a third to have an even bigger and happier family. Our closeness had never been a concern, and we quickly found out that we were expecting number 3. I was overjoyed when my wife shared the news, and we waited about 3 months before telling our families about the new addition. Over the next 3 months, we were busy preparing for the baby's arrival. We focused on planning the nursery, getting our other kids ready for the new addition, and taking a look at our finances, among other things. One day, my wife called me with devastating news. Something was wrong with the baby. We rushed her to the hospital, but unfortunately, at the 6-month mark, she had a termination. It was a tragic and heartbreaking experience for both of us. The next day, as we headed back home, there was nothing but silence and sadness. My wife retreated to her room and didn't come out for 3 days. She was overwhelmed with grief and depression, believing that she had let me down as her wife. I reassured her countless times that this was not her fault, that it was beyond our control, and that we could try again when the time was right. But she couldn't shake off the blame and fell into a deep depression. It took about 6 months, but gradually she started to emerge from her sadness and regain her usual self. We were both doing well with the kids. Her personality began to shine again, and we started discussing our plans for the future. She also started exercising and taking care of herself, getting back into shape. I must say she looked amazing, and I loved complimenting her and expressing my love for her. During that time, she brought up the idea of getting a part-time job. It wasn't primarily about the money, but more about staying active and engaged outside of the house. I thought it was a fantastic idea and encouraged her to consider what she wanted to do and pursue it. Surprisingly, she ended up getting a job as a waitress and bartender at a nearby restaurant. Despite having a business degree, she didn't want a typical office job. She felt that the hours and responsibilities would be too overwhelming, given our home and family, but this job would get her moving and active. It would allow her to earn some money for herself and feel a sense of contribution. Additionally, she mentioned that she needed the opportunity to interact with other adults and break out of the isolation at home. Once again, I expressed my support and told her to go for it. I mentioned earlier that my wife is an attractive woman. I should also mention that she has a curvaceous figure and was looking fantastic with her improved fitness and weight loss. She has always attracted attention from men, but she's always been faithful to me, and I've never had a reason to doubt her. She started her job and was doing well. She worked 2 to 3 nights a week, often on Fridays or Saturdays. I felt a bit uneasy about her work attire because she dressed in a way that emphasized her figure. It was tasteful, but I admit I wish she would opt for more conservative outfits. She found my concern amusing and jokingly said it was a clever way to earn bigger tips and maybe spark more romantic interest from me. The restaurant owner was a decent man who ran a successful business. He treated his employees fairly, and his entire family worked there. However, his son, to be honest, was a bit of an arrogant idiot. He was born into wealth and didn't hide his enjoyment of a lavish lifestyle. He was around the same age as my wife, and I must admit, quite good-looking. He was married but didn't have any children yet. His wife was also a lovely and wonderful person who worked at the restaurant, managing the books. The son was in charge of catering and special events, or at least that was his role. From what I gathered, he was lazy and constantly shirked his responsibilities onto his family and coworkers. What he really loved was lifting weights, working out, showing off his fancy car, depending on his family's wealth, and boasting about his prowess with women. I'm not sure how his wife tolerated all of this. He certainly had a flashy persona, but I wasn't at all impressed. Right from the start, I could tell he was nothing more than an empty, boastful talker. My wife had mentioned several times that the guy was attractive in an exciting way, but he had a terrible personality and she couldn't stand him. However, she had to work with him, so she kept her feelings to herself to maintain peace. They had regular interactions due to work, and somehow a friendship began to develop between them. I wasn't overly worried, but I did caution her that this guy seemed troublesome and advised her to be careful around him. Over the next few months, my wife started behaving strangely. She became overly protective of her phone, claimed to have to work late, and frequently disappeared for long periods, saying she was shopping or running errands. She also became somewhat distant towards me, and I noticed a decline in her attentiveness towards the kids compared to before. My wife is usually a great mother, but during this time, she seemed impatient and more willing to hand over responsibilities to me. It was challenging for me, since I also had a full-time job and was the primary earner for our family. I expressed my concerns to her, but she assured me that everything was fine and that I was imagining problems that didn't exist. One night, when my wife and I were alone and it was quite late, I tried to initiate closeness, but she rejected me completely. I asked her what was wrong, and that's when she started crying and trembling. I asked her again what the problem was, and what I heard next shocked me to the core. My wife dropped a bombshell on me, confessing that she had been involved with the owner's son for nearly 6 months. Their relationship had become close, and she declared her love for him. She stated that our marriage was over and she planned to leave me to move in with him. According to her, she had been deeply unhappy since the termination of our pregnancy, and she felt that something in our marriage had irreparably changed. She wanted a fresh start and the freedom to live her own life. She emphasized that she loved this guy and believed he could bring her happiness. Naturally, I was extremely shaken by this revelation and pleaded with her to reconsider, but she insisted that it was too late for that, and she had already secured an apartment to move in with her new boyfriend. I asked about our kids, and she suggested that it would be best for them to stay with me in the house to maintain a stable home environment, assuring me that she would still be there to see them. To say I was shocked and bewildered would be an understatement. My wife couldn't understand why I was so surprised, as she believed I was well aware of her dissatisfaction with our marriage, and she saw the termination as the final straw. I was pretty upset when I found out who she was involved with. It's one thing to get completely screwed over by your wife, but it's another thing to discover that she's leaving you for a real scumbag. I don't want to make a generalization, but there does seem to be some truth to the fact that many women are attracted to guys like him. I'm not sure if it's his looks, flashy lifestyle, or his big mouth, but she clearly had an interest in him, and things escalated from there. I was also shocked to learn that they had been involved for 6 months without me having any clue. They apparently had closeness in his car, at the restaurant, in hotels, his place, and even our home when nobody was around. It was a true betrayal, and it hurt me deeply. But I tried to think about how I would handle the situation and kept my perspective and composure. What followed were several weeks filled with tears, sadness, pleading, and just a whole lot of crap. My family, especially my dad, was furious and started saying awful things about her. Even my wife's family was upset about the situation, but they didn't display the same level of animosity and bitterness as my side did. I had to step in and ask my dad to stop with the hateful insults towards my wife. After all, she was still the mother of his grandchildren, and he needed to show her respect as a grandfather. My dad actually agreed with me and praised me for how I handled the whole situation. I told him that seeking revenge on my soon-to-be ex-wife wouldn't benefit me in any way. She's the mother of my children, and it's important for us to have a cordial relationship for the sake of our kids. Don't get me wrong, I would have loved to be a jerk, but I thought long and hard about it. I believe I made the right choice, and looking back, I would have done the same thing. As I mentioned, it was a tough couple of weeks, but she did move out and into an apartment with this guy. She still saw our children and tried to be involved in their lives. I also felt awful for the guy's wife, who was devastated by what happened. She left the restaurant and found another job, and she filed for divorce. I would bump into her at the local grocery store sometimes and always wished her well. She was originally from Pennsylvania and eventually moved back home. I heard she remarried a good man and now has a happy life and children. I truly wish her nothing but the best. There's no doubt in my mind that leaving that guy was the best thing that ever happened to her. The divorce itself went smoothly. She did receive some money from me as part of dividing our assets. I agreed to pay alimony support for a short period of time, which I think lasted 6 months. To be honest, it felt like a small price to pay just to get out of the situation. I would have agreed to any financial demand she made just to put it all behind us. I was granted primary custody of the children, and she had visitation rights 50% of the time. I told her she was always welcome to stop by and see the kids. She did visit them on many occasions, and things seemed somewhat stable. I like to think she enjoyed seeing me when she came to visit, but maybe I was just hoping for that. My wife didn't earn much, but she did make a small child support payment every month. I have to give her credit for doing her best and never missing a payment when it came to the kids. Looking back, I have no doubt that my wife was going through some kind of personal crisis because of the termination and its aftermath. I'm nothing special, and it's hard to believe she would have done what she did if she was in her right mind. But I was powerless, and there wasn't much I could do about it. The day we finalized the divorce by signing the papers felt surreal. Despite our amicable approach, it was still tough to go through. We met at her lawyer's office, and it was a somber affair for me. It saddened me to see how happy she seemed about the situation, especially since she was there with her dirtbag boyfriend. It was quite shocking to witness her almost giddy demeanor. We had spent many years together and built a family, so it was the only time during the whole divorce process that I felt disrespected. However, I chose to let it slide because there was nothing left to prove. The marriage was over and we had to move forward. When I put my signature on the papers, I noticed a hint of regret in her eyes. I think my words had caught her off guard because I had prepared in advance and knew exactly what I wanted to say. I must admit, I'm proud of how well it came across. I'm no actor, but on that day, I had a knack for the dramatic. I had written down my thoughts and rehearsed them until I had it down pat. And this is what I expressed. I'm certainly saddened by this. I believed we had a good life and made a strong team. If you feel I let you down because I couldn't bring you the happiness you sought and you thought someone else could offer you a better chance at happiness, I apologize. I believe the termination had a significant impact on all of this more than we realize. When tragedies occur, it can either bring people closer together or drive them apart. It's sad and ironic that what should have been a joyful experience ended up destroying us in the end. But that's all in the past now. My priority is for you to have a happy life, and we can work together to provide our kids with the happiest and most stable life possible. The room fell silent as I spoke these words. Her face turned pale, and I could see a hint of regret in her eyes. With that, I stood up, shook her hand, wished her well, said goodbye, and her lawyer assured me that he would send me a copy of the divorce papers. Things went okay at first. She was living with this guy, but within several months, chinks began to appear in their relationship. He apparently drank too much, was pretty much shiftless, lived off his family, and really was not much of a man. He also apparently had a wandering eye and was already lining up his next conquest. She was a younger girl who worked in another restaurant, which was also owned by his father. Of interest is that I continued to order food from the original establishment. The owner would always greet me when I came in for my order and always had a look of embarrassment on his face. I couldn't bring myself to stay in that place. It would have been too awkward. My ex-wife was working there and living with her new boyfriend, who also happened to abandon his own wife. Needless to say, the owner wasn't pleased. He was a family-oriented man who once expressed his confusion about where he went wrong with his son. As expected, things started to go downhill for this new, exciting power couple. They were constantly fighting, and it became clear that things weren't going well for my ex-wife. I believe she began to realize that maybe I wasn't such a bad option after all, and that the grass isn't always greener on the other side. She had a reliable man in me who always prioritized her and the kids. I was a good husband, and it seemed like she had made a terrible choice. She would call me from time to time to complain about her life, but I made it clear that I wasn't the right person to talk to about it. She argued that I had been her best friend, and she could always confide in me. I acknowledged that it used to be true, but things had changed, and I didn't feel comfortable being involved in her discussions anymore. I believed she needed to work things out on her own with her new partner. She agreed, but I could sense some pain and regret in her voice when she hung up after our conversation. One night, she had the kids at her apartment for a sleepover with her awful boyfriend to watch movies. Later that evening, I received a distressed call from her. It turned out that this guy had gotten drunk and became frustrated because the kids didn't want to watch one of his shows. I'm not sure what show it was, but the kids had no interest in it. So he lost his temper and slapped my youngest daughter because he thought she was being disrespectful. It was a hard slap that left a mark on her cheek. Naturally, I immediately went over to her place when I received the call. My initial instinct was to involve the police, and maybe I should have done just that. However, I went there to get my kids and took them with me. I warned him that if I heard anything else about this incident, my next call would be to the police, and he would face serious trouble. I must admit, it gave me some satisfaction to say to my ex-wife, "So this is what you left me for?" She didn't respond but looked down in shame. I think she was embarrassed by what had happened. I'm not sure if that meant she regretted the divorce, but I believe she realized the gravity of her actions and felt remorseful. Surprisingly, later that night, I heard a knock on my door, and there she was sobbing and visibly upset. I allowed her to come in, and she explained that she had broken up with her boyfriend and wanted to come back home. I took a few minutes to think it over and then told her that I loved her and we had a history, but I couldn't do it. After everything that had occurred, I didn't think it was a good idea for her to return, as there were too many painful memories. I couldn't leave the mother of my children alone on the street, though she came inside and called her parents. I drove her to their place for her to stay. My former father-in-law greeted me at the door and expressed his gratitude. He said I had always been a good man and husband, appreciating that I prioritized the kids and ensured his daughter's safety as my ex-wife. I told him that I would always love his daughter. Things may not have turned out as we wanted, but I wouldn't let any harm come to her. To this day, I'm proud of what I did that night and the decision I made to protect my kids and ultimately my ex-wife. She stayed at her parents' house for about a year until she could stand on her own 2 feet again. Eventually, she found a good job and moved into her own place. She remained a good mother, and her old energy and enthusiasm returned. It wasn't perfect, but there was some sense of normalcy. She had a series of unsuccessful relationships, and I believe she was taken advantage of multiple times. She would often tell me that I was the best partner she had ever had and that no one else could compare. Maybe it was just empty words, but I liked hearing it. Despite all that, we didn't rekindle any romantic feelings, and we maintained a friendly and respectful relationship. I could have been with her again if I wanted to, but I was too afraid of getting hurt again. During that time, I went on dates with several women, but I wasn't looking for anything serious. Some of them wanted more from me, but I wasn't willing to go down that path. I was focused on work, my kids, and had no interest in getting married again or entering a long-term relationship. There were just too many painful memories, and I decided that being single was the best choice for me. The years flew by. My kids did well, went to college, built successful careers, got married, and started families of their own. I would see my ex-wife at family events regularly. She would always ask if I was seeing anyone and if there was still a chance for us to reunite. I always told her no because some things in life stick with you and you can't escape from them. She would look sad and admit that leaving me was the worst decision and mistake she ever made. She said there isn't a day that goes by without her wondering what if. She mentioned how difficult it was for her to attend events like weddings, birthdays, and family gatherings. The toughest moments for her were the funerals of her parents, where she felt a profound sadness. Seeing me there reminded her that I had been a strong and good husband to her. However, on those days she felt alone and filled with regret. She also felt this way during our children's weddings, imagining how those would have been joyous occasions we could have shared. She asked if I ever felt the same, and my response has always been that while it was sad for me too, I chose to move forward and not dwell on the past. I found it ironic that she carried such regret, considering how convinced she was that true happiness lay with her new boyfriend. Now that we're nearing 60, I've been contemplating retiring from work and relocating to a warmer place, at least during the cold months. My kids support me and have a strong bond with their mother. The last time I spoke to my ex-wife before moving was at a grandchild's birthday party. She requested to talk to me privately, and we stepped outside. She became overwhelmed with emotions and upset. She had always held on to a glimmer of hope that we might reconcile. My decision to move away signified the definitive end, and it intensified her lifelong regret for not succeeding as a wife. I reassured her that many years had passed and she shouldn't feel that way. I held nothing but respect and admiration for her. She then asked if she could potentially come to visit me. I told her I wasn't sure, but I would think about it. I must admit, every time I looked into her beautiful green eyes, my heart would melt. On that day, she looked exceptionally beautiful to me, and the years had treated her well, regardless of our past. I never felt a more intense love for her than I did in that moment. At this stage of my life, I thought maybe I would welcome the idea of being in a relationship with her again. I didn't want to get remarried. But what did I really have to lose at this point? She once made me happy, and my love for her had never faded. Maybe at this point in our lives, we could move forward together. Update: I've been spending winters in the Carolinas, and my ex-wife actually came to visit me. It may sound crazy, but all those old feelings are still there. She stayed at my place, and we did many things together. I'm happy to report that even though we're older, we discovered that we still work well together during that special time. Initially, she planned to stay for a weekend, but it ended up stretching into 2 weeks and then a month. One night, she started crying and sobbing because of what happened many years ago. She expressed how the past few weeks had brought her immense happiness and how sorry she was for what had happened. She confessed that she constantly wondered what if, and if she had wasted her life chasing an unattainable utopian relationship. I assured her that the past was behind us, and maybe it was time for us to move forward and reconsider building a future together. I told her that I had always loved her. My feelings for her had never died, and maybe she would like to come and be with me permanently. I told her that I wasn't ready to get married again, but did it really matter at this point in our lives? Surprisingly, she agreed and never actually left my home. Things have been going great between us. When we broke the news to our kids, they had a look of absolute shock on their faces. But they were also genuinely happy for us. My youngest daughter, however, wasn't really surprised because she knew that my love for her mother had never faded, and she had a feeling that it wasn't over. Some people might think I'm crazy for giving it another shot after so many years. But at this stage of our lives, all that matters is love and respect. What happened in the past is truly in the past. Now, whenever I see my wife, and yes, I've always considered her my wife, I feel nothing but love and affection. I believe things will only get better, and hopefully we'll have some good years ahead of us as we enter old age. She made a terrible decision, but that's behind us now. We both face the consequences, but I'm looking forward to life and moving onward. It might sound cheesy, but one thing is important to me. I always believed that we were co-authors of a book, but it saddened me that we never had the opportunity to finish it. Now, I'm delighted that we have another chance to complete that book and include the final chapters. Would my wife cheat again? At this point in our lives, I don't think she would. However, age and experience have taught me that people are complex. We all have both good and bad within us, and one action or decision doesn't define a person entirely. I also have my own regrets. I regret that I allowed sorrowful emotions to influence my decisions, despite always loving my wife. Perhaps I should have recognized her as a human being who made a mistake. Maybe if I had given this a chance earlier, things might have turned out better. I do find myself pondering, what if? But I'm grateful for the second chance we have now. With that said, let me conclude, hoping that my perspective can offer some food for thought to those who have been able to consider it.